My name is Naomi Carter. I was 30 years old when a single unexpected question at my father's retirement party shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. The dining room was alive with laughter, the clink of glasses, and the comforting aroma of roasted herbs drifting in from the kitchen. Near the fireplace, my father accepted congratulations after 35 years with the same engineering firm. Across the room, my mother moved effortlessly from one guest to the next, greeting everyone with a warm smile. Looking at her, no one would have guessed how many things our family had spent years quietly hiding. I lingered near the back of the room, holding a plate of food I'd barely touched. Family gatherings had always made me feel like an outsider looking in. No one ever pushed me away outright. It was much subtler than that. Conversations would fade the moment I walked over. Important decisions always seemed to happen somewhere else, long before anyone thought to tell me. My grandfather, Walter, arrived later than expected. At 82, he walked with slower, careful steps, but age hadn't dulled his sharp eyes. He noticed everything. As soon as he saw me, he wrapped me in a tight hug before settling into the chair beside mine. "You look tired," he said quietly. "I've just been busy." He smiled, but there was something in his expression that told me he wasn't convinced. After dinner, someone tapped a glass and invited my father to give a speech. He thanked his coworkers, his lifelong friends, and finally his family. The room filled with applause as cameras flashed from every direction. For a brief moment, it felt like the perfect ending to a long and successful career. Then Grandpa slowly rose to his feet. "I've been wondering about something," he said, his voice so calm that no one sensed what was about to happen. He looked directly at me. "Naomi, did you ever move into the condo I bought for you?" The room went completely still. Even the music suddenly felt too loud. I let out a nervous laugh, certain I'd heard him wrong. "The what?" Grandpa frowned. "The condominium downtown. I transferred the money nearly 4 years ago. Your parents told me they were taking care of all the paperwork, so everything would be ready once you finished graduate school." One by one, every head in the room turned toward my parents. My mother's smile vanished. My father's grip tightened around the glass in his hand. "I still rent a tiny apartment," I said quietly. "I've never owned a condo." A heavy silence settled over the room. Grandpa looked at me, then at my parents. The confusion on his face slowly hardened into disbelief. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You never received it?" For the first time in years, I wasn't the only one searching my parents' faces for the truth. No one answered Grandpa's question. The room fell into a silence so deep that even the old clock above the fireplace suddenly seemed louder than usual. After a long moment, my father cleared his throat and forced a weak smile. "There has to be some misunderstanding," he said. "Tonight isn't really the time to sort through paperwork." His words sounded calm enough, but something about them rang hollow. Grandpa didn't return the smile. Instead, he slipped a hand into his jacket, pulled out a worn envelope, and carefully unfolded it. The edges were creased and faded, as if it had been opened many times over the years. "I kept copies," he said softly. He laid several documents across the dining table. I couldn't make out every detail from where I stood, but I recognized my own name printed across one page. Another bore a bank's letterhead. A third looked like confirmation of a large money transfer. My mother stepped forward almost instantly. "Walter," she said gently, "this really isn't the place for this." Grandpa remained calm. "I'm not trying to embarrass anyone," he replied. "I just wanted to know whether Naomi ever got the home I bought for her." A home. The words echoed in my mind. For years, I'd worked overtime, skipped vacations, and stretched every paycheck just to keep up with the rent on my tiny apartment. Whenever I talked about buying a place of my own, my parents would remind me how impossible the housing market had become. They always said everyone my age was struggling. I never questioned them. Now I was beginning to question everything. Around the room, guests exchanged uneasy glances before quietly reaching for their coats. They offered polite goodbyes, pretending nothing unusual had happened, and drifted out the front door one after another. Less than half an hour earlier, the house had been filled with laughter. Now it felt strangely empty. Once everyone had left, Grandpa asked if we could talk in private. We settled into the sunroom, the same place where I'd spent countless rainy afternoons as a child with a book in my lap. The familiar scent of cedar furniture and aging books surrounded us, stirring memories that suddenly didn't feel as comforting as they once had. "I transferred the money directly to your parents," he said. "Your father told me it would make everything easier since you were busy finishing graduate school." I stared at him, trying to process what I'd just heard. "How much did you send?" He paused before answering. "Enough to buy the condo outright." The air caught in my chest. This wasn't just a generous gift. It was the future I'd spent years believing I had to build entirely on my own. Grandpa reached across the table and gently covered my hand with his weathered one. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I truly believed I was giving you a sense of security." For the first time that night, I felt tears welling up. Not because of the money, but because someone had wanted to give me a solid foundation, and somehow, somewhere along the way, that gift had quietly vanished. As Grandpa prepared to leave, he looked at me with calm determination. "Tomorrow," he said, "we're going to find out exactly where that money went." Across the house, my parents had barely spoken a word since dinner. But for the first time in years, they looked genuinely frightened, not because they might lose money, but because the story they'd been telling for so long was finally beginning to fall apart. The next morning felt almost unsettling in its normalcy. Sunlight stretched across my apartment floor, neighbors strolled by with their dogs, and a cup of coffee sat untouched on the windowsill as it slowly grew cold. It was strange how ordinary the world looked when mine had completely changed overnight. Grandpa arrived at 10, the same worn envelope tucked under his arm. We spent most of the drive in silence. Every so often, he let out a quiet sigh, as if replaying old conversations and wondering where he'd stopped asking questions. "They always had an explanation," he said at last. It never crossed my mind that I'd need to check. Our first stop was the attorney who had handled the original gift paperwork. She welcomed Grandpa with a warm smile before carefully reviewing the documents he had brought with him. It didn't take long for her to find the transfer records. "The funds were released exactly as instructed," she said. "They were deposited into the account your son requested." I looked at her, barely able to find my voice. "So, the money really went to my parents?" She gave a small, sympathetic nod. "It did. What happened after that would only appear in their financial records." It was the confirmation I'd been dreading. Instead of answering my questions, it only created more. As we prepared to leave, the attorney handed Grandpa a slim folder. "You asked us to keep copies of everything that was signed," she reminded him. Inside were authorization forms, email printouts, and handwritten notes. One email immediately caught my attention. It had been sent by my father only a few days after the money was transferred. "Everything is under control. Naomi doesn't need to know the details. We'll explain it when the time is right." The time had never come. Outside the office, neither of us spoke. Cars rolled past, people hurried along the sidewalks, and restaurants filled with lunchtime conversations. The city carried on as if nothing had happened, while one short email had quietly rewritten the last 4 years of my life. Later that afternoon, I went back through years of old text messages from my parents. For the first time, a pattern became impossible to ignore. Whenever I mentioned looking at apartments, they encouraged me to wait a little longer. When I talked about applying for a mortgage, they insisted the market was too unpredictable. They hadn't just kept a secret. They had gently guided every major financial decision I made. The realization didn't leave me furious. It left me heartbroken, because manipulation doesn't always sound like control. Sometimes it sounds like love. Sometimes it comes wrapped in concern. And sometimes it speaks with the voices you've trusted for your entire life. As evening settled over the city, my phone rang. It was Grandpa. "I've asked your parents to come over tomorrow," he said calmly. "What are you going to tell them?" The truth doesn't need rehearsing. After we hung up, I opened the folder one more time. At the bottom of the email was a reference to another document, one we still hadn't found. Whatever was in that missing file, my father had gone out of his way to keep it hidden. And somehow, I knew it would reveal far more than what had happened to the money. The following afternoon, Grandpa's living room didn't feel anything like the place I remembered from childhood. Sunlight drifted through the lace curtains, but it did little to soften the tension hanging in the air. Even the walls seemed to be waiting for someone to finally tell the truth. My parents arrived together. My mother greeted me with a hesitant smile. My father couldn't bring himself to meet my eyes. No one poured coffee. No one tried to fill the silence with small talk. Grandpa set the folder neatly on the coffee table and looked at both of them. I asked you here because Naomi deserves the truth. For several long seconds, neither of my parents said a word. Then my father exhaled slowly. The money wasn't stolen, he said. It wasn't the answer I'd expected. Grandpa didn't react. Then tell us where it went. My father rubbed his hands together, a nervous habit I'd watched him repeat my entire life whenever he found himself trapped in an uncomfortable conversation. We were in financial trouble. I frowned. What kind of trouble? He glanced at my mother before speaking. Your brother's business was collapsing. He'd borrowed more money than he could pay back. If we hadn't helped him, he would have lost everything. The words hit me like ice water. So, you used the money Grandpa gave me? My mother's voice was barely above a whisper. It was only meant to be temporary. We truly believed we'd pay it back before you ever found out. But you didn't. She slowly lowered her eyes.
No.
Without warning, a memory came rushing back. For years earlier, my brother had moved into a beautiful new home. The whole family had celebrated what everyone called his incredible business success. I remembered hugging him, congratulating him, and quietly wondering how everything had changed so quickly. Now I knew that memory would never feel the same again. I wasn't jealous of my brother. I was mourning the life I might have had if someone had trusted me enough to tell me the truth. Grandpa's voice remained calm, but there was unmistakable disappointment behind it. You could have asked Naomi. My father slowly shook his head. We already knew what she'd say. His words hurt more than I expected. Not because they believed I'd refused to help, but because they had decided I didn't deserve the chance to choose. The silence that followed felt endless. Then Grandpa reached for another envelope, one I hadn't even noticed sitting beside him. I've kept this all these years, he said quietly. I hoped I'd never have to use it. He slid it across the table. Before my father even opened it, the color drained from his face. I looked at Grandpa. What is it? He met my eyes with quiet sadness. It's the document your father never thought anyone else would see. As my father slowly unfolded the papers with trembling hands, I realized the missing file had never been about the condo. It was about a promise he had made, and a promise he had quietly broken. My father unfolded the papers with unsteady hands. For several long seconds, he just stared at them in silence. He didn't have to say a word. The look on his face revealed almost as much as the confession that would eventually follow. Grandpa glanced at me before breaking the silence. When I transfer the money, he said quietly, I asked your parents to sign a written agreement. He slid the document across the table. It wasn't a formal legal contract, but it was clear and impossible to misunderstand. It stated that the money was a gift for my first home and couldn't be used for any other purpose without my knowledge or Grandpa's permission. At the bottom of the page were two signatures I recognized instantly. My mother's, my father's. I stared at the faded ink, struggling to connect those familiar names with the people sitting across from me. I don't understand, I said softly. If you agreed to this, why didn't you call Grandpa before you used the money? My father shut his eyes for a moment, because I already knew what he'd say. Grandpa didn't interrupt. He simply waited. We kept telling ourselves we'd pay every penny back, my father admitted. Your brother's business was falling apart. Creditors were calling every day, and he was terrified of losing everything. We thought that if we helped him get back on his feet quickly, no one would ever find out. And when that didn't happen? I asked. His gaze dropped to the floor. 1 year turned into 2. Then 2 became 4. The longer we waited, the harder it became to admit what we'd done. For the first time since we'd arrived, my mother spoke. Her voice was barely more than a whisper. Every time you talked about saving for a house, I felt sick with guilt. Every time you showed us another apartment, I wanted to tell you the truth. But shame has a way of convincing you that staying silent is easier than being honest. Her words didn't make the pain disappear. They simply gave it a shape. I thought about all the weekends I'd spent working while my friends traveled. The promotions I'd chased because I believed earning more was my only path to owning a home. The sleepless nights I'd blamed myself for not getting ahead fast enough. For years, I believed I simply wasn't doing enough. Now I understood that I'd been trying to build my future while carrying a burden that was never mine to bear. Grandpa folded his hands and looked around the room. "This stopped being about money a long time ago," he said gently. "Now it's about trust." No one argued. As we got ready to leave, my father stopped me at the front door. "There's something else you deserve to know." His voice was calm, but heavy with regret. "The condo wasn't the only gift your grandfather intended for you." I slowly turned to face him. In just 2 days, everything I thought I knew about my family had begun to unravel. And somehow, I could already tell there was another secret waiting to be uncovered, one that stretched back far beyond the last 4 years. I barely slept that night. My father's final words kept replaying in my mind. "The condo wasn't the only gift your grandfather had planned for you." By morning, exhaustion had given way to curiosity. Grandpa asked me to come back to his house. When I arrived, he was already waiting in his study. Resting on the desk between us was an old wooden box I recognized instantly. I'd been curious about it ever since I was a little girl, but whenever I asked what was inside, Grandpa would simply smile and say, "Some things only make sense when the time is right." He gently ran his hand across the lid before opening it. Inside were old photographs, birthday cards, and a carefully tied stack of letters. "They're all for you," he said quietly. I looked at him in surprise. "For me?" He nodded. "I started writing them when you were 16. One for every milestone I hoped I'd be here to see. Your graduation, your first home, your wedding, even the day you might become a mother. I knew life doesn't always go as planned, so I wanted you to have my words, even if I couldn't be there to say them myself." My throat tightened as I untied the faded ribbon. The first envelope was labeled, "For the day you receive your first home." It was still sealed. With trembling hands, I opened it. Grandpa had written that a home was never just a building. It was a place where peace could take root, where loneliness could slowly fade, and where no one could ever make me feel as though I didn't belong. He hoped the condo would be the beginning of that life for me. Instead, it had remained a future I never knew had already been waiting. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. "I failed you," Grandpa whispered. I looked up immediately and shook my head. "No," I said softly. "You trusted the people you loved." He lowered his eyes, and for the first time since all of this began, I saw something deeper than disappointment. I saw grief. Later that afternoon, my parents came to the house without anyone asking them to. My mother carried a small photo album in her hands. "I found this while cleaning," she said quietly. "I think it belongs to you." I opened it slowly. The pages were filled with moments from my childhood, school plays, birthday parties, family holidays, and quiet afternoons spent with Grandpa. Tucked into the last page was a folded note written in my mother's younger handwriting. "Naomi has always asked for so little. I hope that one day we can give her everything she deserves." She stared at those words for a long time before finally speaking. I don't know when we lost sight of that promise. Neither did I. But for the first time since the truth had come out, no one was trying to justify the past. We were finally willing to face it. Then Grandpa looked at each of us in turn and quietly said something that changed the course of everything that followed. "I've already decided how I'm going to make this right." No one asked what he meant. Somehow, we all understood that whatever came next would reshape our family and every relationship within it, for years to come. The room stayed quiet after Grandpa finished speaking. No one rushed to fill the silence. By then, we'd all realized that some moments needed time to settle before anyone tried to explain them. Grandpa rested his hands on the table. "I've spent the last 2 days thinking about what fairness really looks like," he said. "I can't change what's already happened, but I can make sure the future isn't built on another secret." His eyes settled on my parents. "I'm no longer interested in assigning blame," he said gently. "What matters now is honesty." My father gave a slow nod. The quiet confidence that had always defined him had given way to something I hadn't seen before. Humility. I understand. Grandpa reached for a folder that had been sitting quietly beside him. I met with my attorney this morning. I noticed my mother's expression tighten, but she didn't interrupt. I've updated my estate plan. There was no anger in his voice, no desire for revenge. He spoke with the calm certainty of someone who had made peace with a difficult decision. I've documented the condo gift exactly as it was originally intended. It will be recognized as Naomi's inheritance that she never received, and my records will reflect that. No one objected. For the first time, the truth existed somewhere more permanent than memory. It had been written down, beyond anyone's ability to reshape it with time or convenient excuses. Grandpa turned to me. "This isn't about favoring one grandchild over another," he said. "It's about restoring something that should never have been taken from you." A lump formed in my throat. For years, I'd imagined justice as the apology I never expected to hear. Instead, it arrived in the form of acknowledgement. My father cleared his throat. "I spoke with your brother." I looked at him. He never knew where the money came from, my father admitted. "We told him we'd refinance the house to help his business. When he found out the truth, he cried." I hadn't expected that. Somewhere deep down, I'd convinced myself he must have known. "He wants to see you," my father continued. "Not to make excuses. Not to defend himself. He just wants to apologize for benefiting from something he never realized had been taken from you." I wasn't ready for that conversation. Not yet. But for the first time, I could imagine a future where healing might include all of us. As I stood to leave, Grandpa picked up the bundle of unopened letters and placed it gently in my hands. "They belong with you now." I held them close to my chest. At the very bottom was one envelope I hadn't noticed before. The handwriting looked slightly different, as if it had been written years later than the rest. Across the front, Grandpa had written just one sentence. "Open this when you've finally found your way home." I stared at those words for a long moment. Then it hit me. Home had never been about a condo or an address. It had always been about living without secrets and finally belonging somewhere built on truth. What I didn't know then was just how close I was to discovering what that truly meant. 3 months passed before I finally opened the last letter. By then, life had settled into a quieter rhythm. My parents had started family counseling, and my brother and I had met for coffee several times. At first, our conversations were hesitant, filled with awkward pauses and unfinished thoughts. But they were honest. For the first time in years, no one was pretending the past had happened any differently than it had. I had made a choice of my own, too. Instead of waiting for the perfect time or the perfect home, I started looking again. Not because I wanted to replace what I'd lost, but because I refused to let that loss define the rest of my life. One rainy Saturday, I found a small condo on the edge of the city. It wasn't luxurious. The kitchen was simple, the floors creaked with every few steps, and the balcony overlooked a quiet row of old maple trees instead of a glittering skyline. The moment I walked through the front door, I felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. Not because the place was perfect, but because it was my choice. No one had made the decision for me. No one had hidden the truth from me. This beginning belonged entirely to me. Before I signed the papers, Grandpa insisted on seeing it for himself. He wandered slowly from room to room, smiling at the little things most people would never notice: the afternoon sunlight spilling through the windows, the cozy corner that would be perfect for reading, the solid front door that closed with a reassuring click. "This feels like home," he said softly. I smiled. "It does." That evening, after everyone had gone, I sat alone in my new living room and opened the final envelope. Inside was a single handwritten letter. "Dear Naomi, if you're reading this, then you've finally discovered something I always hoped you wouldn't spend a lifetime searching for. People often believe a home is something another person can give them. It isn't. A true home begins the day you stop measuring your worth by someone else's choices. If the people you love disappoint you, let the pain make you wiser, not bitter. If the truth comes late, welcome it anyway." And if you're ever forced to choose between protecting a secret and protecting a relationship, always choose the relationship. Walls can give you shelter. Only honesty can give you peace. With all my love, Grandpa. I folded the letter with care and placed it beside the others. As I looked around the quiet room, I realized Grandpa's greatest gift had never been the money. It wasn't the condo. It wasn't even the letters. It was the freedom to stop carrying a story that had never truly been mine. My parents couldn't undo what they'd done. Neither could I. But they chose accountability instead of excuses, and I chose healing instead of resentment. That didn't erase the past. It simply gave the future a chance to begin. People sometimes ask me what really changed after my father's retirement party. I always tell them it wasn't the discovery of a missing condo. It was the moment one unexpected question shattered years of silence and gave our family the chance to replace secrets with truth. Now, every time I unlock the door to my home, I'm reminded that peace doesn't come from having a perfect life. It comes from knowing there's nothing left to hide. If this story stayed with you, remember this. Families aren't defined only by the mistakes they make. They're also defined by the courage to face the truth, accept responsibility, and choose honesty over silence. Sometimes the greatest form of justice isn't revenge. It's breaking the cycle so the same pain never has to be passed on to someone else. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end of this story. If Naomi's journey meant something to you, I'd truly appreciate it if you took a moment to like this video and subscribe. There are many more heartfelt stories here about family, forgiveness, resilience, and the quiet courage it takes to rise above betrayal without losing yourself. I'd also love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you were in Naomi's position, what would you have done? Would you have been able to forgive, or would the broken trust have changed everything? Your perspective could be exactly what someone else needs to read today. Until next time, remember this. The truth doesn't always arrive when we want it to, but when it does, it has the power to heal, to rebuild, and to set us free. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next story.